Tonight, we're talking about whether there is a dichotomy, whether faith and science can coexist. Often a very hot topic in our popular culture these days. Before I even get started, can I just have a show of hands? How many think they can coexist? Faith and science can coexist? Okay. How many of you think that they cannot? Oh, I think we should all just go home then. I'm sure some people are shy. So one of my stories, during my training in graduate school, I remember talking to one of my friends, and we were pipetting or doing experiments, and then we were talking about weekends. It's like, oh, so Jimmy, what did you do this weekend? And like, oh, I said, oh yeah, we had a church picnic, and we're doing stuff. It's like, wait, you went to, did I hear church? And I'm just getting to know this. I'm like, yeah, no, I go to church on Sundays. And he's like, oh, Jimmy, I know. You're my friend and all, and this is what I'm going to tell you. And he said in a very whispery voice, don't tell other people you go to church. You'll commit intellectual suicide. And I was very sort of appreciative of his advice and his warm caring for me. And I told my friend, like, I think it's okay. I think faith and science can come together. And frankly, this is believed by a lot of people in our culture and in our society that there are strong antagonism between the two. And sort of the thing I'm going to sort of lay before the table is I'm going to argue sort of that there isn't this big tension between the two. Let me start off by, I'm going to talk about 4 things quickly. I don't have much time, only 12 minutes. I'm going to talk about 4 topics. I'm going to talk about history, talk about science, and talk about philosophy, and ultimately talking about faith. So historically. So I always think about what is sort of the biggest accomplishments of science? Like, what do people aspire to? Some people aspire to sort of winning the Nobel Prize, right? Like, wow, you win the Nobel Prize. That's sort of the ultimate achievement of science. In my opinion, actually, the thing that I aspire to one day is to have a unit of measure named after me. Because I don't know, you don't know, a lot of the Nobel, do you know who won the Nobel Prize in physics last year or chemistry, right? But you know these units of measure. And I dream of one day, one Jimmy, maybe it's a period of time, or maybe it's a distance, right? And that's sort of, and interesting, if you look at sort of units of measure, which I sort of do for fun because I'm a nerd and I like to study these things, you have some of these sort of amazing people who've contributed significantly to science, and units of measures are named after them. Since we're at Harvard, people are smart. Let's do a little bit test of actually you know your units of measure. We'll start easy. What's the unit of measure of force? Newton, right? So Isaac Newton, fame, he invented a lot of sort of physics and sort of invented calculus on the side because he's so smart. But some of you know that he wrote a lot about religion, very sort of devout in his faith as well. So there's somebody who, unit measure named after him and very devoted in his faith. How about unit of pressure? Pascal, right? Pascal, not only known from his work on triangles, but also general mathematics, but his work on the Pensées, right? Amazing piece of French literature exploring faith as well. Okay, we'll get a little bit harder. Capacitance. Farad, someone heard Farad, right? Michael Faraday, again, these are not just sort of nominal church people because everybody was Christian. No, these were devout church members, himself, elder and a preacher in his church, right? Again, revolutionized the field. Atomic mass unit. Dalton, right? Lord Dalton, John Dalton, a very sort of devout Quaker. We'll go a little bit faster since there are a lot of these. This will be a little bit trickier, especially in the US. Temperature. Oh, see, I think I got some of you. Obviously, the right scientific way of measuring temperature is Kelvin. I think I heard about half. So William Thomson, Lord Kelvin, obviously his work in measuring temperature there, and the list goes on, right? So And also now units of measure, like Maxwell's equation, John Maxwell, or think about Kepler's laws. So historically, there really not only was no tension between faith and science, that a lot of the luminaries, the people that have advanced the field and left their mark in terms of these units, were people of faith and of a very devout faith. And even today, I'm at the NIH, and my boss's 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 boss is Francis Collins, who himself, right, is a very sort of devout Christian faith. And there are plenty of Christian scientists, this institution and other institutions that sort of see no tension. And so this sort of antagonism actually has been a rather recent phenomenon. But why so? Why is there sort of seemingly sort of fight between them? And I posit that this is potentially our sort of lack of understanding, potentially, of the role of science. Wow, that was quick, almost halfway. So science, what is science good at? And as a scientist myself, science is very good at explaining things that you can observe and that you can repeat, you can do experiments with. But then science, there's a lot of things that science cannot do, right? If you look at, the college, there are obviously many, many disciplines that science can't answer. You can't do an experiment to see whether Hitler lived or whether we landed on the moon, right? We can, within our, for example, bioethics, right? We can do research in terms of figuring out gene engineering, but there is no scientific experiment that we can do to say whether that is right or wrong. Science can not tell you what's beautiful. Science is very, very powerful, but it is very sort of, you need to really understand what it's able to, the questions it's able to answer. And some people elevate science to be one of sort of a metaphysical. Often some people use the word scientism. And some of the scientists that you talk to may believe in this. And some of my friends, when I was doing research, and even now, I think that they believe that a fact can only be true if it can be proven scientifically. Or be proved from first principles. Some people call this positivism. This is a philosophy of science. What is sort of epistemology? What is true, right? Again, something can be true, only can be proved by science or derived by first principles. The problem with that statement is that very statement can't be proven scientifically or be derived from first principles. Do people get that? So if people are hearing this for the first time, like, wait a second, yeah. Because science starts from a method, from basic assumptions and presuppositions that cannot be proved scientifically. So even if I think science is very, very powerful, but even if you start to do science, there are things that underlie science. Often people, philosophers of science or epistemology, these provide the foundation on which to build science on. So let's sort of really think about science for what it is, and not ultimately the only metric of all that's true. So then, what are things that science can prove, and what are the things that science can't prove, right? And this is where this is the sort of the conflict that often is in tension. And there's sort of a role of faith, and there's a role of science. And often what people in the past, people think about religion as a ways that, this is a very common characterization, is, what, we do science. If we don't know what's happening, we just sort of, God did it. Or, this is often called the God of the gaps. So, in sort of ancient, whether it's, we don't know, we didn't understand the water cycle, right? So we pray to the gods, and now we understand the water cycle. So the rain, we think that we don't need a God for that. But the God of the Bible, the one I believe, is not one of the gaps. That we're only when we can't understand something, that's where God exists. Actually, it's the opposite. It's completely different, meaning God is the creator of all things, the God that I believe. And even if we understand the mechanisms of how we do it, understand sort of the how of these processes, it actually causes us to marvel even more. As I study whether, the complexity of the cell, or what happens in our bodies, or the complexity of the genome, it makes me marvel, not only sort of at the mechanism, but sort of the creator of that mechanism. So we're going to sort of dive in much deeper in this, and I only have a very short amount of time. So that's sort of a little bit of taste of this. I think I'll sort of talk a little bit about medicine in my sort of final 2 minutes, is as a Christian and as so I do work for rare diseases, and there's patients that come to us, babies that are born, that are never going to speak, never going to walk, never going to contribute positively to society. But in our organization, we try to support them, we love them, and we see their families with them because intrinsically we think that they have value because they have created in an image of God. So in that sense, my faith has tremendous impact on what I do, whether it's the science that I do as I sort of see the fingerprints of the Creator, or whether it's in terms of deciding what we're going to dedicate my life to, right? For purely utilitarian people who think that, you know what, we should only help people who, provide a positive impact, should we just sort of let these people on the road to die? Or if you're purely, an atheistic worldview, if they're not propagating positive genes to our gene pool, what should we do with them? And those are questions that because I'm not of that persuasion, it's hard for me to answer, but I can clearly say that from the faith tradition sort of that I'm in now, that it is amazing to be able to see the explanatory power of the Christian faith in almost everything that I do, not only science and politics, economics, in terms of ways that God is being made present in all these aspects. So we're going to dive in a little bit more, and I can talk about a little bit from my personal past as well, but hopefully this gives you a little bit of taste of what I'm thinking about science and faith.
Very interesting, very, very big topic, and I'm talking about God first, but actually I'm a non-believer somehow. And here is this question that we all have, and the conflict between faith and science. I believe, even though you supported Zimi, that there is no conflict. Everybody raise their hand, but inside, we know. When we read textbook, we have conflict. We are human beings, we have conflict inside us. So I will tell you a personal story of mine to tell something about how this conflict can change our lives sometime. This is about this altruism. It's about sacrificing your fitness, your life to protect the community. That's a very core belief in Hinduism, or Hindu faith. And in my science, we work on this, our natural selection. Those who are fit, they survive. So we fight, we compete. Now, this is a picture of me in 1993. It's a long time ago. I was different. In a village in India, and my dad, he was a poet, and he believed in altruism, but he had cancer. So he refused to have any treatment. And I was in oncology training. I said, come on, Dad, you have to come and get the treatment. He said, no, your treatment is not going to help me because the cancer cells are evil. If you try to kill them by your therapy, you're going to be more evil. They're going to become stronger. Instead, in my body, I have my own altruistic cells. According to his Hindu faith, his logic, I will talk to you about that later on. So they believe in that. I said, come on, you're going to die. So this is how it is. Like, for us, life is all about competition, fitness. This is how we believe as a scientist, art evolved, life originated. And my dad said, no way, it's altruism. I said, well, you're going to die. Of course you died after a few months. And then, of course, I had to do my research. I was very interested and fascinated about stem cell right from my medical school in India. So after about 10 years in Toronto, then I moved to Stanford University. It's a nice campus. That's why I went there from Toronto, So there, my job was to study human embryonic stem cells, to study how human embryonic stem cell make choice or somehow can survive in extreme hypoxia, low oxygen, and how some of the stem cell might become cancer stem cell. Because this is believed somehow cancer originated from stem cells. So we want to understand what is the big bang of how a stem cell become cancer stem cell by natural selection, by mutation, by clonal evolution, according to our theory, scientific theory. Then I came across with the data. I'm not going to explain about this, but these are embryonic stem cells in flow cytometry. They're very healthy. They're not dying. When you're exposed to hypoxia, reactive oxygen species, all die. Only few survive. But among these almost dying cells, there are cells like this, a big, highly expressing some genes, and they protect the rest of the community. In a model that we published in summary, this is the model. So, I'm sorry, this is not a scientific discussion, so we're talking about faith and science, but I will, help you to go through the slides so that you understand a little bit of this concept. So if the stress try to kill these stem cells, according to the existing view on natural selection, all will die, some will mutate, and they might become cancer stem cells. This is what I was trying to prove, actually. With altruistic stem cell, some cells will transform themselves to a higher level of cytoprotection, and they will then protect the rest of the community. And this is what we found, and that's how we have kind of been now dedicating ourselves with my team at Forsyth Institute as a part of Harvard Dental School, right across the Kendall Square, where we're trying to study oral stem cell and oral cancer initiation. But basic point is this, I felt guilt about my dad because I really said, come on, give me a break. What is this faith? And now when we actually finding altruism, and when I talk to many scientists, there are a lot of research being going on about altruism. Altruism is even present in bacteria. And I really felt bad because I really said bad thing to dad, And I believe many of you had the same conflict. That's why you're here today. Instead of enjoying your life, you're here in this seminar. Because sometimes, our textbook changes. Maybe after a few years, we will say the clonal evolution may not be correct. Because that's all about science. Science is open to any changes. But so my lesson was this, to find out, because I'm basically at the core, I'm a scientist, to really understand what was that faith, why he came with that kind of hypothesis so strongly, what was underlying that. Maybe I need to go back to that and find out how he came up with that revolutionary idea. Even though he was coming from a small village, I said, what is the source? So I then read his book. This is the book he really read. This is Rig Veda. And this book was composed 1,000 years ago in India. And this is the Bible of Hindus. So I said, okay, let me read it, what it is there. So then I also wanted to understand what was my dad's worldview. So I went back, memory like that. So this was my dad's worldview. That Earth is our mother, period. That's the faith. It is composed about 3,000 BC in the Indus Valley Civilization area, this Rig Veda. And according to my dad, based on that, many Hindu philosophers came up with different kind of interpretation. That because Earth is still surviving for millions of years, And according to Hindus, the universe is about 25 billion years. And we have about 330 million planets around the universe. That's the Hindu cosmology. So because Earth is still surviving, it's because of altruism. So Earth is powerful. We should trust Earth. That's the core belief of Hindus, according to Dad. And then Dad was always talking about an American philosopher, Henry David Thoreau. I believe some of you heard about his name. He wrote a very interesting book called World and Pound. And he's from Concord, right near, And he was a very active member of Harvard Divinity School back in 1850. And he then was reading Rig Vedas, also Gita and other Hindu books. And so I read about him. And now, luckily, my home is right near Walden Pond. I live in Lincoln. So I often go to the pond. And, I will always encourage some time to go here. This is a beautiful area. This is where Henry David Thoreau lived for about 1 year. And then he realized that what Hindu seers wrote 1,000 years ago about nature power, about Mother Earth, makes sense. So his friend Emerson wrote a very powerful book called Nature. And that really transferred American view about environmental protection. So I realized that my dad had a very bigger source. So I'll finish my talk with this one very important component of Hindu faith. And this again coming from the same composer, from same book, Rig Veda. And you can share this thought. Every scientist, every student will really share with this. It's written many years ago, 1,000 years ago. It's in Sanskrit, so I have an English translation. But let me read, how many minutes do I have right now? Good, I can actually read this. Because remember that these verses were chanted during the time of Sumerian civilization. Something is long before 3000 BC. So it is about this, Navi Janami Yat Ivedam Asmi. I don't know where I'm walking. I'm confused. My mind is confused. Ninyaha Samadhu Manasa Sarami. In this confused mind, I get lost with my faith. My faith is not helping me. Yada Magan Pratamaja Ratcha. When I really feel my faith, I rediscover my faith again, then at it vaku asinav bhagam asya, I really get transformed. I really feel happy. I rediscover myself. I think this is what Henry David Thoreau, he recited those verses in the Walden Pond, and I share with you, as an American, now my home country is America, this is the big message for us. We have faith, but our central core problem today is not the conflict between faith and science. The real problem is our climate change, our Mother Earth. So we need to go back to the Hindu faith and see how our ancient seers really had the message for us. And then we need to really bring faith and science together to work to protect Mother Earth. Because if you do not protect Mother Earth is so powerful, according to Hindu faith, that human species will be wiped out like other mass extinction. That's what we study in the lab. So God is not going to prove us. There's no God to protect us if you really betray Mother Earth. And that is the message that even Henry David Thoreau wrote in his Walden Pond. Thank you so much.
Thank you both so much for those interesting and contrasting introductory talks. We've got a few questions that we have planned to explore together in our discussion. And the one I want to sort of kick off with is a question about how important is it to have a systematic understanding of your belief system. You've talked a little bit about your Christianity, and Bikul has talked about his Hinduism. Maybe, Jimmy, you could start off with that. Bikul has showed us a certain type of way of understanding one's belief system. Can you talk about whether you think it's important that we have a systematic understanding? How important is that?
Yeah, happy to. Can you hear me? Okay. I think oftentimes, living in modern culture, we have a lot of sort of outside inputs, right? We have information overload, and there are a few times we have glimpses of, why am I even here, right? What is sort of this meaning of life? And sometimes we sort of run the rat race, and I give this example, you're sort of climbing the ladder until you sort of get to the top of the ladder, you figure it out like you're on the wrong ladder. So some people figure this out sort of early, other people sort of figure out sort of midlife crisis, right? Like their whole lives they're sort of looking for certain things, and now they have it, and it's sort of not fulfilling them. So I think it's crucially important for us to all of us to sort of continue to ask ourselves, why are we here? Why are we doing this? Why do we do things that we do? And to be systematic is just as systematic as we sort of approach academic studies, because if this is going to be important and this is the reason of us living, potentially it could be even more important than in our academic studies or our career pursuits to answer these questions. So I definitely think that is very important.
So Bikul, you've read us some Sanskrit poetry and so forth. That's a kind of different aspect of a religious belief, and perhaps different from systematic development. So how would you respond to the question of how important is it to have a systematic understanding of your worldview? Or are there other aspects of one's faith, religion, worldview that are equally important?
Yeah, I think let me first answer the first question. In Hindu, first thing is the belief, faith. How do you define it? Very difficult. So that's why there are about 6 different philosophical parts in Hinduism. One of them is Samkhya. Samkhya, that's the source of Buddhism. So I'm inclined more towards Samkhya because it's about all this dialectic, about really systematically searching what is in my faith, what am I? And another philosophy is Vedanta. According to Vedanta, all universe has only one Brahma, force, the living force. So no matter what I am, what I believe, this faith is shared by millions of individuals because I am not a distinct entity, I'm a part of the whole. So I need to search systematically myself through my life, who am I? And then the third philosophy is Shakti. Shakti is more inclined to Mother Earth. Shakti means like really blind worshiping, blindly, without asking any question. You have a feeling coming, just go for it. Because if you trust your feeling, you know this feeling is Shakti. The feeling will protect you. So you don't have to even worry about it. The other philosophy, the other first is called Gautama, means logic, reason. Only logic can explain things. So for me,
So can one pursue all of those things simultaneously?
Not really, because according to Hindu belief, you are born with your karma, your destiny. I have a type of nature that I will be naturally inclined to one of this path, and I should follow my path. Okay. And then I might transform myself. One day I might go from one path to other path. I might change my religion.
So where are you in this journey?
Interesting question.
That's not too personal.
I am here to share my personal thing. I think everybody wants to have that, right? Personally, I'm really enjoying right now, I have done my science. I did my MD, my PhD, my postdoc, Zemino postdoc. I'm really now interested in coming up with some kind of connection, if I have, with natural science, nature. So I often go for a walk in Lincoln, Concord, to Walden Pond. So I'm really trying to rediscover what kind of mind I have, what kind of flow it comes to me. It's called mindfulness or smriti. And it's really helping my experimental design, my writing. It's actually, that faith is actually bringing more strength to me.
Okay, thank
Can
you.
I respond to
Yeah,
that quickly? I think I actually like the term that this forum is used as Veritas. So as a scientist, I'm looking for truth. And I think that there's sort of big questions, right? Why do I exist, right? What's the purpose of my life? Why is there something as opposed to nothing? And there's sort of these big questions. And for me, I think that there is truth out there. And my journey has been sort of trying to figure out what is that truth. And there's many different worldviews and religions. I grew up as a Buddhist, and thinking about, I'm very much sort of involved in sciences and wanting to be an atheist. Was atheist for a little bit. But when I started to look at sort of all the evidence for the different religions and say that, what, at the end of the day, the religions have often conflicting views, right? And it can't be both A and not A, right? 1 + 1 can't be equal to 2 and 3. So as in my search for truth, that's sort of my journey in terms of sort of thinking about, try to answer these big questions, and ultimately, are there sort of true answers to these big questions of life?
And one of the things you emphasized in your lead-off talk was that you showed that historically it has not been the case necessarily that science and religious belief, or Christianity at any rate, have been in strong tension. There are many examples in history of scientists who were strong religious believers. So does that mean then that science and faith should be integrated? Can they be integrated together, or are they just held as separate facets of our life? What do you think?
That's a good question. Some historians have sort of posited, it's a little bit controversial, but that the scientific revolution, the explosion that has happened, is very sort of intrinsically sort of tied with the Protestant Reformation. And some people have said that sort of provides the foundation for that. How is that so? I think for any scientist to sort of study the world, there's some basic assumptions, and that the world can make sense. We can make sense of the world, that there's a system, it's a rational universe, that there's laws that govern it, that we can actually assess and figure out these laws. These are all sort of assumptions that sort of scientists have taken. I think from a Christian perspective, it makes a lot of sense because there is a creator that's created the world after him and given us to think our thoughts after him. So that provides that foundation in terms of my own scientific worldview, in terms of building that. And I think for other systems, they need to sort of answer those questions as well. Why is there something as opposed to nothing? Why does math work so well? Why the universal laws govern, every corner of the universe is governed by that? Is there a lawgiver because of law? So these questions sort of must be answered by all the different worldviews. And in my own sort of journey, the Christian faith has been able to sort of match it the very best.
And how does this integration of science and religion work for you?
This is a good question. Let me tell you historically. When British first came to India, they had a tough time to translate religion to Indian Sanskrit, because for us, religion is dharma. We call dharma. Dharma is about your journey, your faith. And you should not be confined to one dogma. You need to experiment. So religion for us is this, that we have a feeling for God. Because of this feeling, God exists. That's enough. But that feeling doesn't come so nicely to us. Everybody agree with me. It comes in a confused form. So the religion is my faith that I'm experimenting in a scientific manner, really logically, asking questions, analyzing, finding myself, helping the community, and eventually evolving as what I am. So in that sense, faith is a big part of science. Indeed, as a scientist, as you know, Jamie, right? We have big conflict among scientists, but we believe in something, my hypothesis. I will stick to it. Because if I don't stick to my faith, what I believe, my experiment will go really, everything messy. I have to believe in something. So indeed, inside science, we have religion. So I don't see any conflict at all.
Okay, okay. Let's move on to the question of ethics and morality. One of the things those of us who have a religious perspective are aware of is that historically, it's often been the case that religious arguments have been used to deem human, to justify human actions that today we look upon and see as being immoral or improper, whether we're thinking about slavery and so forth. And so my question to both of you is, can science help us in those types of situations? Does science have a role to play in the formation of ethics? Are we as a human race, are we moving progressively forward in our morality? And is science helping us to do that? Or where do we stand? What do you think about the religious ethical challenges that you see over history? Jimmy?
Yeah. So from a Christian perspective, I think we see ourselves as there's sort of an emphasis on grace, and that even though that's we become Christian, that we still are prone to error, and we do things that potentially are not potentially we sin as well. So oftentimes that throughout sort of the history that no Christian is perfect, right? Now the Christians continue even after they become Christian. I think the Christian is the first to say that they continue to err in that. So historically, I think there's ways that you sort of look at the church that there has been ways that they sort of have now sort of deemed potentially as erroneous. But I think the way to actually look at it is not sort of the act of Christians, but in terms of actually the teachings themselves. So looking at the teachings of Jesus, and that hasn't changed as the sort of the ultimate metric. What does the role of science come in that? And that's sort of your second part of it. Let me answer in a different way. Less in terms of science, in terms of scientific method, but I think evidence is a thing that often, the Christian scriptures, they talk a lot about. So for example, one of the 4 Gospels is written by a doctor, that he's there looking for evidence, or another gospel written by John, he writes, I write these things. There's so much evidence to talk about it. Jesus himself talks about sort of evidence. So not necessarily in sort of the scientific sort of method of sort of testing, but in terms of evidence, plays a strong role in helping people come to faith. It's not a blind faith; it's faith that's definitely by evidence. However, is science then a better method to sort of evaluate faith, right? Like, can science? And that, as I said earlier, I think science actually is more within its domain of looking at things that are sort of repeatable. And I don't think there's an experiment you can do of whether killing babies is right or wrong, or whether Nazi torture was right or wrong. All the bioethics things that you sort of hear about, there is no scientific experiment you can do. So I think there's limited in terms of science as a way of sort of determining morality using the scientific method, but science as a way of sort of providing evidence for belief, that has similarity there.
Would you like to take up the same question? What's the relative role of science and religion in moral and ethical development?
Well, I think I really agree with Jimmy. His point is valid. Very strong point. I believe that faith does not need science, because human being has lived for probably our species lived for millions of years, probably. Like from mammal to us. But science needs faith, because without faith, science should be like a stem cell becoming a cancer stem cell. So if we don't have faith, being a scientist is a dangerous thing probably, because we can do a lot of harm. I agree with him. And on the other hand, on the perspective, the important question was, historically, religion has done a lot of evil. We agree on that. We read history. And no religion is kind of a pure in that sense. Hinduism has its evil, like caste system. Christianity has and all this war, Islam, name it. But I think this is where the Hindu belief is just a little bit kind of different. So Hindu's faith versus the state, the religion are different. Because the religion is kind of a part of nation state, an organization. And you have to do some necessary evil, as the state, kind of politician says, right? So politician will twist or use religion to faith people. Now, how can science help us to protect faith from those evil forces, to turn faith into bad religion? I think it can. There are many examples, but I can only give example from my experience, from a Hindu perspective. As a Christian, you can give examples. As a Muslim, somebody can give example. And in Hindus, one of the evil that many people twisted for the last about 1,000 years was telling that about caste system. So our main books doesn't talk about caste system at all. But some guys came back in about 200 BC when Buddha came. Buddha opposed that. Say, hey, we need caste system. That's easy. Once you have put people in the caste, you can control them. And so for many years, Gandhi came, everyone tried to really eradicate that caste system. Because we know this is not a part of Hindu faith. It's a part of the politics, part of the whole tribalism. So now the recent genetic evidence about all the mitochondrial DNA showing there was no caste. Mm-hmm. And this is the biggest convincing factor for many Indians now.
That's very interesting.
This is the right contribution of science to our
important contribution of science to ethics.
Yeah, thank you.
So let's move on and also talk about the question of meaning or purpose or significance to life. A lot of people find meaning in life through their religious faith. Can science also contribute to the meaning of life? What do you think? Jimmy?
That's a good question. I haven't sort of thought about whether science can contribute. I think people can have many things that give them sort of fulfillment and purpose, and there's for some potentially scientists, they marvel at the beauty of mathematics, or and that they sort of get contentment from that. And I think as a Christian perspective, it sort of points to God, and then in fact, people sort of talk about science and faith and at odds in Christian circles, but I actually like to say that the first profession mentioned in the Bible was scientist. When Adam and Eve were when Adam and Eve were in the garden, right? The first thing that God told Adam to do, right, is sort of cultivate and name animals. And naming animals is what zoologists do, right?
Okay, zoology. All right, good.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point. I like that.
And sort of the cultivation. So you can call it gardener or zoology, and naming animals. So I think there's ways that from a Christian perspective, science can sort of help in terms of understanding God better, and how from sort of other worldviews. Again, science is sort of a tool that can be used on top of worldviews. Although I'm not an atheist, but potentially an atheist could find fulfillment in just sort of seeing beauty, and for them that provides fulfillment, and maybe that could be a way for them to sort of have meaning or purpose. But I ultimately sort of go ask for a question, like ultimately which one is sort of the truth there?
Yeah. I want to come on this question of meaning of life, significance.
Yeah,
purpose.
well, I think one example for meaning of life, for Hindus particularly, about science. So for for thousands of years, our textbook, sacred book wrote, there are millions of universe. We need to go around, because if I'm dying, I can reincarnate in one of these 330 million universe. So as the scientists are exploring the space, Hindus are really feeling fulfillment. Kind of our expansion, our imagination is kind of expanding. So this is a direct contribution of science to Hindu faith. This is one example. Even sometimes I myself wonder about this. We have this technology now. We can go on Mars or somewhere, as a biologist, stem cell scientist, can I contribute something like that? So it's kind of excitement. So I think faith and science are complementing for me personally.
Okay. Let's take it a step further. I think the people in our society who are atheists, who don't come from a religious perspective, might well argue that the crucial question for religious people, religious believers, is why do you believe? And you ought to be able to give a reason for your belief. So my question to you and to you both eventually is, what are the reasons why you hold the religious belief that you do? And how would you answer that kind of question?
Thank you. I think this is a very important question. Straight answer is that you do not need any reason to believe, according to Hindu faith. Because based on Shakti principle, you are born with some innate ability to believe. You do not need the reason. It's you. This is called yatra anukamam saranam. Follow your desire with freedom, without anybody talking to you, interfering with your belief. So I don't have to justify what I believe. Jimmy doesn't have to justify if you want to go to church or not. It's up to him. He doesn't have to justify to any society. So because this freedom, so I believe in that.
Okay, so you're not sure we need reasons. What about you, Jimmy? What are the reasons for your belief in Christianity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I struggled a lot with this. My whole life, as I know, we see some Asians as sort of a dutiful Asian son, firstborn of the firstborn. My job was to get into an Ivy school. That was my meaning of my life, right? Hopefully starting with an H or an S, if not, we're starting with a Y. So my whole life, I sort of did not go into the right, preschool, so I can go to the right elementary school, so I can go to the right middle school, so I can go to the right high school, so I can go. And there I was as a freshman at Yale, and just like, okay, now I'm here. So what? It felt really, really empty. And that's why I sort of started my journey at that time is, what are the different faiths? And are there reasons to believe in these faiths? And my own journey, I looked at sort of Buddhist faith, looked at atheism, and looked at Christianity. A purely atheistic scientific, which was my top actually at that time, because I was becoming a scientist, and I thought I was actually a math and physics major at the time. I started to ask a lot of questions to my intro physics teachers and organic chemistry teachers about what we understand about some basic mechanisms on an atomic level, and I got a lot of I don't knows very, very quickly. For example, we talked about organic chemistry bonds and why did these bonds form, and we were talking about sort of the quantum aspect of these bonds, and I'm like, and they couldn't tell me that, oh, we're still working on it. I'm like, wait a second, I'm a freshman in college, and we've already reached to the end of our understanding of these disciplines. I'm like, you know what? I don't think they have the answer then about the rest of the questions. I looked very deeply into Buddhism as well, and into Christianity. One big difference for me in terms of that comparison of Buddhism, it comes from very much sort of a self-attainment from Buddhism. I know Buddhism is different in Asia and versus in India, but a lot of me growing up, it's sort of like doing the right good things so you can then eventually sort of get to a final place after death. And whereas Christianity, it makes sense to me where that, no matter how much you good, you still, you're not God. So you sort of ultimately are unable to attain that nirvana or ultimate. And it made, then it makes sense to me that God himself had to become man. And this sort of idea of God reaching out was very, very attractive to me. Sort of emotionally, but also the historical evidence was very convincing to me as a scientist, wanting sort of evidence. And a lot of Christians talk about this in terms of the cross. And to me, there's so many evidence about the cross and how that. But to me, it just came that it was pretty obvious that most historians, almost all historians, believe that Jesus existed, right, and he died, right, and then. People debate what happened after he died, but there's a huge movement of Christianity today, right? So something happened. So he died, his followers all spread out and hid all over the place, right? And people, deny they even knew him. And something happened. Something happened so that they went from the scattered sect of, religious people who lost their leader to gather together to die for this belief. Some of them hung upside down on the cross and spread this movement that happened to now, billions of people in the world. So something must have happened in that. And for me, the most sort of acrimonious and Occam's razor was like, okay, maybe, he did raise from the dead. Because you look at all the other types of reasoning, whether someone just stole his body, but like if they really stole the body, why would they die for this this lie themselves? So at that time, so whether it sort of emotionally sort of made sense comparing religions or in terms of evidence, and as I grew more in it, there was more and more sort of reasoning for me to sort of learn and sort of believe in this faith.
Thank you. So I'm going to press you both a little bit harder on this question. And the way I want to press you is to ask the sort of negative question, which is to say, what sorts of things give you reason to question or to doubt your faith commitment? What sorts of things might even, if in your wildest dreams, cause you to change your mind about Christianity? Can you address what are those tough questions for you about Christianity? Sure. And I'm going to ask you about Hinduism.
Yeah. The hardest part, I think I was talking to some of the students before, is sort of problem of suffering. And this is I think a lot of us who struggle as Christians. If God is all powerful and all good, why would He allow the world sort of in a system where there is suffering, right? And where there's sin and a fall, and especially with my own loved ones or our friends sort of suffering, to sort of question sort of the goodness of God. And those are the times that I think I have sort of most doubt and sort of things that I struggle with the most.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the core belief in Hindu faith is that we trust on Mother Earth to do good for us. And the trust means that we trust that whatever we human are doing bad right now, at a global level, this is a very difficult situation now. Because every day, new species are being threatened for extinction. And sometimes I doubt myself, I'm studying cancer. Are we turning ourselves to cancer or what's going on here? If we see ourselves as a species. So my belief in Hindu faith is somehow Mother Nature will correct us. If it doesn't happen, I will then doubt my faith. Mm-hmm. So that's okay. Number one. Number two is that often I question, Hindu faith evolved in India, in an Indus Valley civilization. And those who read civilization, that was the only civilization where there was no weapon, nothing. It is amazing. So far, we could not find any kind of evidence of war. It was a non-violent kind of civilization. So how that civilization turned into so bad that now we have so much suffering, poverty. So, I mean, why Indian is not doing something? Well, Indian community is good answer. We have been invaded. I said, okay, we have 60 years now, So I want to see if India develop much better, reform, regenerate, my faith in Hinduism will go up. Number 3 is this, that one of the core things about myself is that often I try to become vegetarian. So I struggle. So if I go for fasting one day, I have to eat more next day. So I doubt myself, am I really a Hindu or am I just making it up? So I'm trying to evolve myself to answer that question.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you to both of our speakers for this dialogue. We're now going to go to your questions. And by the miracle of modern science, those questions are being beamed down to me at this very moment onto this laptop. And I'm going to try to select those that seem appropriate. The first question that is really asked to both of our speakers is this. How can different worldviews exist? For example, Hinduism or Christianity, Islam or Christianity. How can there be so many different versions of truth?
Oh, yeah. Well, I have an answer. Sorry. Can I give the answer first? Of course.
Go ahead.
So it's called, according to Hindu faith, truth is one, but everybody view in a different way because of our own complexion, because of our own karma. So our belief that there are different faith, different religion is actually an illusion.
Okay. It's an illusion. Right? Okay. Jimmy, what's your view?
As a scientist, I think that there can only be sort of one truth, but there could be perspectives of it. There's things that some worldviews share in common, but then there's definitely areas where they're definitely sort of in conflict. And of the different worldviews, I think you have to sort of compare the different worldviews and see sort of which one has sort of the most evidence for that. And I mean, why are there so many? I mean, people have beliefs in a lot of different things and create that, but ultimately, I really think that one of them can sort of correspond to reality.
Okay. I'm going to read this out. I'm not sure I agree with the question, but I think it's a good question nevertheless, and it's for you, okay? The question says, Hinduism supports that God is in tune with evolution theory. How do you reconcile the conflicting theories of evolution and creationism within Christianity? How do you reconcile those views?
Great, yeah, and I agree with you in terms of sort of questioning the same. I think there are Christians who are on both sides of sort of the evolutionary debate, if you will. There are Christians that believe in evolution. They're called, theistic evolution. And people like Francis Collins, and how they would explain it is, God, look at how amazing is evolution, right? Like, look at this amazing creator of this mechanism that creates, right? So even though we can explain the phenomenon, right, we still can explain the creator of that phenomenon, and I mean, that's the how of God using it. And those people would also be creationists, right? So creationists that believe in evolution. So tell me how to use it. But other people who also would sort of deny evolution and think that sort of God creating not using evolution, but using more sort of miraculous methods to do that as well. So I think there's sort of people on both sides, and I think personally, I think that there's definitely some explanatory power in terms of evolution. but we're so sort of far away from being able to explain that. So what do you mean by that? So I'm a genomic scientist. I study genomes for a living. And a lot of sort of estimation of evolutionary power comes from comparative genomic analysis. And how is that done? I don't want to be too technical, but they look at, you have a snapshot of the letters of the ATCGs of different genomes, and you draw trees based on mathematical models, and that's your sort of evolutionary tree. Those models are good and very sophisticated, but are built on tremendous amounts of sort of assumptions there. So I think there's but we're sort of, we still need to refine that. Evolution doesn't tell you, how life began, right? Evolution doesn't, explain a lot of different phenomena. So I think it's a good working model, but and Christians differ on whether it's true or not. But even if it's true, which I lean more towards, I think it's to appreciate the amazing God who used this system to be able to create all the diversity of life.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a different question to Bikul, because this is the question that's been offered along similar lines, just pressing you a little bit on some of your aspects. It asks, how does Hinduism deal with the question of evil? If we're all one life force, does that mean I am of the same makeup as Hitler?
That's a good question. So, my wife wrote a book about my belief. It's called Bhatharti at the Sunrise, because we met in Bhutan, and she's from Germany. She asked me the same question straight. So,
wow, amazing wife.
So one simple answer, how to define evil? If you define evil in relative to human species, yeah, Hitler was evil because he killed many millions of human beings. But if you become an animal, like pig or somebody, for them, we're evil. Right? So we have to agree with that. Because now we know that a gene that we have, we share the same gene with fish. They have probably feeling, we don't know yet, but we are going for that. At Stanford, we have now a big neuroscience program that dealing with this question. So Hindus have really fought, really struggled for that, the fundamental question. And this question was answered by Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita. Because there, Lord Krishna was fighting a big war. There was like millions of soldiers back in about maybe 1000 BC. So his friend Arjun was supposed to kill all of them. Arjun said, wait a minute, Krishna, you're a god. Why are you asking me to kill them? This is evil. Because I don't want to fight. Then Krishna said, wait a minute, if you didn't want to fight, why did you make everything there? You have struggled so much. You are making your own conflict. I didn't do anything. You guys fought yourself. Now you better decide. And according to my plan, you're going to die anyway now because of your karma. So in a sense, we don't decide who is evil or good. It's God decides. How God decides? By karma. If you're doing good, I'll be protected. I'm doing bad, I'm bad. So how do I decide bad or good? It had to come from my instinct. Hitler knew he was doing bad. He was evil. And we agree, all millions of people, that Hitler did a bad thing. That's why he is bad. So in Hinduism, that's why the main foundation of good or evil is in relation to creation. The creation is Mother Earth. If we're doing harm to Mother Earth, we're evil.
Okay.
That's the reference point.
Okay. We're going to keep moving on because we don't have too much time left. Thank you very much for that answer. This question is really for both of you, and I think you both sort of made this point, and so it's a fair question to ask both of you. And it says this: can you clarify why science requires a faith in God? And if you still hold that science requires such a faith, then how do you view the work of your atheist colleagues? How does your science compare to theirs? Are they lacking something that your work has?
Yeah, I'm happy to address that. Yeah, there are obviously some amazing scientists who are not Christians or they're atheists. Do science need a belief in God? No, definitely. There are people who do great science. However, what's necessary, the foundations of sort of thinking that the world is sort of rational, that there's laws, that the world doesn't just change on a whim, right? Let's say people don't believe this, they're like, of the Greek gods. Or I don't know if people watch Star Trek, there's like Q. Star Trek, like Q can just change the laws of the universe with the, right? If you live in the world that you think that, the laws of the universe can change all the time, you would do science very, very differently. So I think in our current modern scientific endeavor, the belief in a rational universe, the belief in laws, the belief in constancy comes from a Christian worldview. People can sort of have taken those without basis, so people have sort of rejected it, but they still have that foundation that they sort of take as a given without sort of derivation. So for Christians for people who do science with those assumptions, I would just ask them, where do those assumptions come from for them?
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. Would you like to address this?
Okay. Sorry.
You need faith to be a scientist, and if not, what's the relationship? Because you talked about there being faith in science too, right?
Well, my dad, back to my dad, I used to thought I'm atheist, because back to, how atheists can be scientists, how they're doing very good if God is not protecting them, because he's not believing in God. That's the question, right? So I used to say to my dad, I'm atheist, I don't care for God. So he used to tell me, no, there is no atheist. According to Hindu faith, there cannot be atheist. Okay, you believe in something, but that's your God. Because that's a force. It's called Brahman. That you are believing in something because that's true of you. You should explore that. You should go for that. And that's your God. So.
Okay. Well, I'm going to, yes, thank you. I'm going to move on to a slightly related question. And I'll ask you both, but I'll ask you first, Bikul. And the questioner asks this: how do you respond when a colleague asks, quote, you are a scientist, how can you believe in that religious stuff? Okay? How do you defend your faith succinctly, and how do you attempt to open the minds of your colleagues to the possibility of believing?
Yeah, that's a good question. Once I went to give a talk at one of the conferences in San Diego about altruism, stem cell altruism in bacteria, but he probably misunderstood. He came to me and said, Bikul, you are a nice scientist, you're killing yourself. What the hell are you doing? What is this? This is a faith. This is a belief. This is religious. You should get out from that. I'm advising you, have a good publication, a good thing. Stay away from that. So I said, so what do you mean by that? What do you mean by religious? Why do you dislike religion? I gave a straight question to him. He said, religion is all a bad thing. I said, well, you better do something good. What is your religion then? I don't have. Well, that's very bad for you now. You're a dangerous guy. You better believe in something. So he said, that makes sense. So I was able to actually pause him, make him believe that we should respect religious faith. Like my dad believed in altruism, right? He believed in a different context. Like Jimmy, we discussed about that. He believed in altruism as an intention. But in biology, we don't know. We don't know if stem cell is intention. We believe in biology as evolving, selected force of cytoprotection or survival. So this may be different. But we cannot really say that you're religious or you're wrong something. That's bad. So as scientists, we do not say that, proper scientists.
Okay. So Jimmy, you want to take that one? How do you respond? You alluded earlier to that kind of question being asked to you. How do you respond and try to answer, give a reason, and open the minds of the other?
Yeah, I mean, there's many different approaches, right? There's sort of the intellectual approach, which I sort of mentioned. You can talk about epistemology and ask them about why they, why do they believe in the scientific method, and eventually sort of point to them that the foundation of science is a philosophical presupposition, and they're like, oh, okay, so there's the intellectual aspect. But there's potentially sort of, there's way of sort of emotional as well. I think everybody longs for something greater than themselves. So you can sort of talk to that about them, and what are they thinking about sort of meaning of life? And I think everybody has some sort of yearning of something much bigger than themselves as well. So there's an aspect. And there's also moral. People talk about that as well in terms of people want to sort of do what's right, but then sort of how do you figure out right and wrong? And if it's purely, so I think there's sort of many different approaches. And ultimately, from a Christian perspective, what's important is I think, to learn from Jesus, right? Jesus loved the people that he talked to and met them where they were, whether it's the woman at the well and talking to her in that way, or different people have sort of different needs, and I think it's important as a Christian to sort of love the non-believer as well as the believer and try to sort of figure out what are the ways that we can serve them and help them understand.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. We've got to wrap this up, but I'm going to let each of our speakers just have one final word. And so, Bikul, is there one last thing that you'd like to leave the students with as your kind of final word, please?
Yeah, thank you. My final word is, art is our mother. So as an American, we should be really taking care of our belief and directing this belief to connect ourselves to natural force. I think this is the faith we need now in America, worldwide. That's my message.
Thank you very much. And Jimmy, one last thought for the folks here.
Yeah, I think it's actually great that you guys even sort of show up to this type of event, meaning that you guys are thinking of these things, of these sort of big questions of life. And I would just want to encourage that, to explore these questions, not necessarily sort of take answers, glibly, and to deep dive in, right? It's the stuff that Bikul and Isa, we make mistakes. So I would encourage you to continue to dive in. And these questions are important. Don't delay. Don't wake up in a midlife crisis, and and I think these are questions worth exploring. So that's my encouragement.
Thank you.